Hello, hello. Welcome to Tech Ascent, the podcast where we dive into the trends, strategies, and success stories that are reshaping the tech landscape as we know it today. I'm your host, Oliver Klingane. I'm also the founder of Ascension, the premier business development partner within tech. Today, we're joined by a very exciting guest. We're joined by Koushi Sunder, the founder and CEO of Stemless. Koushi, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
It's great to have you on. It's great to meet you. Would you mind telling the audience a little bit about yourself and what you do with Stemless?
Sure. So I started Stemless about 10 years ago. It'll actually be 10 years this September. And we are a targeted text message marketing service. So we help retailers reach their target audiences using smart technology. So if you want, I can go into that a little bit more.
Yeah. Give a little explanation. I'm sure the audience would appreciate it.
Sure. So if you are a retailer, something that we have noticed is that, texting is the easiest way to get a hold of your clients. So it has a 98% open rate. You're at everyone's fingertips. It's very different than any other channel that way, whether it be email or social media marketing. And so with that, retailers have really moved towards texting. What we do is we help the right message get the right person at the right time. So when I say that, I mean, if you bought something 3 months ago, especially if it's a consumable product like a lotion or vitamins, now might be a good time for you to re-up. So that would be a good opportunity for one of our retailers to send you a message reminding you to do that. We help with everything from telling customers happy birthday to helping stores collect reviews. Everything's automated. We plug into stores' retail point of sale systems, and we get information on, who's buying what, how much they're buying, when they're buying it, and how often they're doing it, so that they can craft messaging that will, help customers make better informed decisions in terms of purchasing.
Very cool. Very cool. And it's definitely so advantageous to have kind of that SMS piece of your marketing, especially as a retailer. And also, congrats on 10 years of being in business. Rewinded the clock a little bit to 10 years ago. What gap in the market did you see that made you want to go into this this business, this area?
We actually bounced around a little bit. When we originally started, we did a little bit more of online ordering. And we tried that for a bit. And, like many startups, especially 10 years ago, the startup landscape was more voluminous. There was a lot more activity in the space. And, we knew we wanted to serve retailers. And as we were doing that, we tried different features, different products that we thought would be interesting. And when we started doing smart texting, that's when it felt like we hit jackpot. Mm-hmm. And, that's when retailers really started to depend on the platform, which I think that was the first time that we really saw that behavior. And it's, finding that product market fit was absolutely instrumental.
Nice. And being the founder, CEO that's kind of been through that journey, searching for product market fit, something we see a lot in the tech landscape is that it is a struggle. Was there something kind of along that journey that helped you decide whether it's time to keep scaling or it's time to pivot? How are you kind of navigating those early days?
In the early days, it was a little bit of like throw spaghetti against the wall, see what sticks. Some really good advice that I got that I would recommend to anyone that's thinking about starting something is, when you start like a company, a project, you want to grow, right? And a lot of people have ideas for you, things you could do better, things you should try, like, oh, you should have this product or you should add this feature. The only people that you should be listening to are the people that are paying you, because everyone else is a hypothetical. Until someone starts giving you, revenue for what you have built for them, no one else really matters, And so that, I think, was really where, we've really taken that to heart, like not just originally, but even, today, our biggest source of market research are our current clients.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that's something we've heard before is the power of customer feedback. There's nothing higher than that on the pyramid.
No, they already like you, and they are telling you how they would like to like you more.
Mm-hmm. No, I like that, and that's a good way to look at it. And do you have any CEO strategies, maybe, of taking that feedback and turning it into something beneficial for your platform?
You know, even when the customers are paying you, someone might suggest something that is very niche to their business, and in the first year or two, you might not know that, you might not understand that because everything is kind of new to you, in terms of what people are requesting. But after a while, you start to pick up a pattern of like, hey, a couple customers have asked me this, or customers were pitching to say, if you had this, I would sign with you, but I really need this and you don't have it. And so, starting to pick up those patterns, I think, is something that I would recommend. So, A, pay attention to the people that are paying you. B, of the people that are paying you, pay attention to recurring patterns.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, great way to look at it. Great way to look at it. And Koushi, you also mentioned that the landscape, especially the startup landscape, has changed over the past 10 years since your early days. Now being in such a competitive tech space, what does the competitive landscape look like for you?
So originally, when we started 10 years ago, startups were hot. Tech startups were very hot. And lots of people were throwing lots of money at founders. And it felt kind of like a bubble, even then, in the middle of it. And I remember, we did raise a seed round in 2017. And raising a round of funding is not fun at all. But we did it. And I remember after that thinking, I don't ever want to do this again. And, some people are very talented at it. And, great for them, but I wasn't. And I think that actually ended up being like a very fortuitous coincidence. Because I said, I never want to do this again. I really pushed hard for us to be profitable. And in 2020, we did hit profitability. And so, the change in the landscape that we're seeing now is there's still a lot of money being thrown around. However, the metrics that VCs and, people writing checks are very different. So, profit matters, revenue matters. And it's no longer revenue at all costs. They're really looking at, sustainable growth. They're really looking at, like more than hype, which I think was very big in, say, 2015. Hype is not as much of a thing these days. And so, because we're profitable, it puts us in a very different seat. We don't have to raise money, but if I needed to go out and raise capital for a new project, it would be a lot easier today because, the business has been around for a while. We've had a nice, growth clip. And on top of that, we have all the things that a healthy business should have.
Yeah, that's awesome to hear. And after the seed round, you obviously had a bit of funding. Now your profitability's where it should be. What's kind of the differences in how you operate as a CEO versus when you're operating with somebody else's money versus kind of your own money now?
Well, before we were profitable, every penny really counted. And so, the amount of work that I took on myself just so we didn't have to hire an extra seat to do it. We were just a lot more frugal back then. And now that we are profitable, I actually think that I'm a lot looser with our funds. Not in that, we're just burning it, but I think some great habits were created in those days. But, today, if we need a person, I can tell you if it's in the budget or not. And when it becomes in the budget, we can get that person in. We have an advertising budget. We have freelancers that do, anything from, small projects that are tech-based with our development team, or, sometimes create marketing assets for us. And so I would say we've actually become more loose with the purse strings now that we are profitable. But I know it's because we can afford to be.
Hmm. Yeah, nice. And from a visionary standpoint, trying to continue to grow the company, how does that affect your kind of mindset of how you approach the day to day? Maybe outside of the budgeting standpoint, just on a looking ahead kind of visionary mindset.
We're always thinking about like new verticals we want to attack. And so, and with that, like what our current feature sets have that would align with, other industries than the ones we're currently playing in. And, in the retail space, I mean, there's so much variability. Like, a laundromat has very little in common with a gym, a fitness center, which has very little in common with a vitamin manufacturer. So, finding the things, if we decide to go into a new vertical, finding the things that matter to that vertical, to the marketing and, business owners of those spaces, and then, looking at how our current feature sets stack up with that. And, if they don't, is there anything we can do to tweak our current feature sets to, also serve this market, or is this something we should revisit at a later date?
So, Koushi, I know you mentioned just some of the general growth things you've seen with the company, your mindset. Over the kind of best 10 years you've been in business, what do you think's been the biggest challenge as being an entrepreneur?
I would say that like that question changes every year. So, when I first started, I was a solo founder, and it's obviously a lot easier if you have a co-founder to sort of divvy up and conquer the work. But then, oh, and I remember a big thing being I didn't have a CTO and I don't have a technical background. And a lot of these things were pointed out, when I went to go fundraise, no CTO, no co-founder, not a technical background, no prior exits, no prior startups. And so those are a lot of, hills to climb. And I would say, at some point you climb it or you don't. And in our case, we climbed them. And, some things that maybe originally were a hindrance are now super beneficial. Like I would say, I'm really glad I don't have a co-founder now, because I don't have to run decisions by someone else. I have to get my team on board, but there's not someone else who, like, in 10 years, I mean, people can really grow apart. Mm-hmm. And then, you plug the holes. Like I didn't have a CTO, but I don't still to this day, but I have a lead developer and I have a team of developers, and they're all great people who know what they're doing. So, now I would say, our issues are more with expanding, making the right choices in how we're going to expand. Are we expanding from a geography standpoint, like going into other countries? Are we expanding from an industry standpoint of, like what other industries will we serve? Or is it more of a product standpoint? Like, should we incorporate emails? Should we incorporate, Instagram, like, stories? So those are more of the questions that matter now. But and not just questions, but kind of the challenges we have. It's like you're always trying to get to that next step, but then when you get to that next step, there are a new set of challenges there, and so it's always evolving, and I now that I'm in this seat, like, it'll never stop, but it's definitely a lot more relaxing today than it was 8 years ago.
Yeah, I'm sure. And I think that's what makes business fun, is that it just is constantly evolving. It's constantly, once you figure out how to overcome a challenge, for example, in a lot of businesses, sales might be a challenge. Once you kind of solve that bottleneck, then it's delivery, then it's like retention, and then it's just this ongoing thing of you got to figure out the next piece of the puzzle. I think that's what makes business so fun. But it sounds like the way you guys are moving with Stemless, you're in a good spot. Some good challenges to solve.
Yeah, I think so.
Mm-hmm. And with that, it sounds like delegation was something that was an early uphill battle for you, figuring out how to do that. Looking back on that, was there any good lessons you learned along the way that made that a little easier?
I think I'm a much more effective communicator today than I was back then. I might have, like, asked someone to do something and just, expected them to know exactly how I, in my head, wanted it to be done. And even, like, they would point out how I wrote it on Slack and say that you literally said this. And I would be like, well, obviously, if I said this, then you'd have to do the rest of it. And they'd be like, why would I know that? Good question. Why would anybody know that? And so I think, becoming more clear in the way that I communicate and the scope of, if I give someone a task or we have a project, especially with the developers, making sure we're very much on the same page. Another thing we do here is we use AI for note taking, because especially in technical meetings where we're discussing how to build, there are a lot of details in those conversations. And if those aren't being written down, then the odds of anyone remembering anything or everything a week later are like 0%.
Mm-hmm.
And so, and we even realize, like, even just us writing notes, I might write the notes of things that I think are interesting to note, or I think like, oh yeah, we should remember this. But I might say something that one of my coworkers thinks is interesting, but I didn't write that part down. And so the AI note taking tools have like really helped, mitigate that the propensity for miscommunication.
Yeah. Things get lost. It's inevitable, but with these note takers, definitely beneficial. Do you have one that's your preference?
We're trying Otter AI right now.
Okay. Yeah. I use Fathom. Fathom's a good one. Fathom AI.
Okay, you like that one?
Yeah. No, they're good. And I had a similar conversation the other day. It's just like a few years ago, prior to these note takers, you'd be paying attention to the meeting, but you'd be writing stuff down. So you're really only 50% present. Whereas nowadays you can be 100% present and then look back, you've already got your notes written. So definitely stuff like that. Definitely changing the way people operate, and it's definitely a benefit to businesses. Do you have any other kind of use cases for AI in your day-to-day, or is that the main one?
That's the main one. Although I will say, sometimes we use it for idea generation. So if we're trying to come up with like, marketing content, or like catchy, like, if we've got a new feature and we want to, name it, brand it, we will use AI to help us. It can't be left alone. You take what you get and then you kind of massage it. But definitely for idea generation, it's been, very helpful.
Mm-hmm.
And we've also incorporated AI into our product. So, when customers send text messages, our system can help them craft what that message should look like. And I do know we have a few customers that really like it, because you can even put on, a personality to your message. You can make it formal. You can make it funny. You can make it tongue in cheek. And so, there are a lot of use cases for it. And I would say that we probably haven't even scratched, the tip of the iceberg on what all we can do with it.
Yeah. There's so many different use cases, and it's such a cool tool. And I think that's the biggest thing, is we've got to credit to being a tool, because like you said, you can't leave it alone just yet, but if you put the right tool in the right person's hands, then it can go a long way. And speaking of kind of lessons along AI, I love speaking lessons along entrepreneurship as well, Koushi. You've been in business for 10 years now, being a founder. One of my favorite questions to ask towards the end of the podcast is, if you could rewind the clock a little bit, kind of tell Koushi on day one of starting her business, give her one piece of advice, what would that one piece of advice be?
You're not as smart as you think you are. When you hear, like, there's a stat, and it says like it takes an average of 5 years to become profitable as a company. I remember looking at that and being like, oh, I could do way better. You shouldn't think that. You should be prepared to, for it to take longer. And if it takes that time, great. If you're there before that time, amazing. But you should not expect that. And you should really, really, consider all of the things you don't know. Don't underestimate your competitors. Don't think you know all about a space. Always, there's so much to read. There's so many people to talk to that know more than you. And there's so much you can learn from not only your competitors, but your customers and your own team. And so, really, really make sure that you are always paying attention to what people are telling you, because people aren't always explicit in what they say. For example, a customer might ask you if you have something, and you might say, oh no, we don't. And you can end it there, or you can dig into, why are you looking for this? Or how important is this to, what you want to do? Because, this might be very important to them, and they might leave you if you don't have it. And especially if it's something that you can do fairly easily for them, it's probably worth doing, especially if they're a good customer. And so, really pay attention, I guess, and ask questions. I don't think that, like, when I started out that you know, I don't think I was shut off to it, but I don't think I really appreciated how much that is tied to, any founder's success.
Yeah, wise words, wise words. And it is definitely a powerful lesson. And like you said, it's something that you kind of underestimate, especially at the beginning, but if you really want to kind of take that leap forward, it's something you got to learn. And we've looked at the past, Koushi. Looking forward, what's the goals for Stemless? What's the vision? What's on the horizon?
I think we grew about 20% last year, which was great. We've had a very consistent growth rate, so really just looking to keep that up. One thing that we're at a point right now where, the marketing techniques that we used 2 years ago aren't working as well today, and so we're retooling what that looks like going into, the rest of 2025, 2026. We're exploring new verticals to go into, as well as, do we want to expand geographically? So those are some of the big questions that we're wrangling with, that I think we'll have some answers on within the next couple months. So once we do that, then we'll, put together those strategies, and then we'll start rolling out the execution on those. So, looking forward to that being a successful, but, a pretty long and well vetted process.
Awesome. No, it sounds like you guys have created the foundation. 20% last year, continuing to grow. So we'll love to hear it. And for everybody listening, I'll be sure to tag Koushi down in the description on LinkedIn, their website. But Koushi, is there anywhere specific you'd like people to go look for you?
Sure. You can go to our website, www.stemless.co.
Awesome. And I'll tag all that down in the description. But thank you, everybody, for listening. And Koushi, once again, thank you for coming on.
Thanks for having me. It was great chatting.
It's been a pleasure.